Hello, everyone. Good day. My name is John Garianda Tanza, and for today's theory, I will be discussing about the cultural approach to organizations theory of Clifford Geertz and Michael Pakinowski. So, before I'll discuss about this theory, I hope that everyone is doing well and you're in the comfortable position right now, so that you can understand and comprehend the concept of this theory. So, let's get started. So is the creator of this theory. So the creator of this theory are Clifford Geertz and Michael Pakinowski, which they created in the 1970s. So this theory aims to recognize that culture is like a web. In order for a culture to exist, there must be shared meaning, understanding, and sense making. So now, Geertz and Pakinowski. Clifford Geertz views culture as webs of shared meaning, shared understanding, and shared sense making. Geertz is a theorist by trade who said humans are living on webs, that they have spun themselves, and culture is those webs. So it is also a shared meaning and understanding, and this is what we find in the webs. Michael Pekinowski that communication creates and constitutes the taken for granted reality of the world. So Pekanowski in turn implies Gert's theory to the organizations by saying we need to understand the web and the spinning process. Pekanowski says that communication is used to spun these webs. Gertz and Pekanowski described organization as having their own culture. This means that any given organization has a particular culture in which the meanings for things are shared between individuals. The environment that surrounds each company is called the corporate culture and consists of organization's image, character, and climate. The culture is learned through the use of stories or metaphors used to convey the messages the corporation wants to share with its employees. So, what culture is and what culture is not? Culture is the characteristics and knowledge of a particular group of people, encompassing language, religion, cuisine, social habits, music, and arts. So it is also a system of shared meaning and beliefs. So, they speak of culture as synonymous with image, character, or climate. But Pekinowski is committed to great symbolic approach and thus considers culture as more than a single variable in organizational research rather. Organizational culture is not just another piece of the puzzle. It is the puzzle. So from our point of view, culture is not something an organization has. A culture is something an organization is. So what is the specific goal of this theory? So the specific goal of this theory is to sort out the symbolic meaning of people's actions within their culture. As Gert said, it is to discover who people think they are, what they think they are doing, and to what end they think they're doing it. So there's no shortcut for the amounts of participant observation required to collect an exhaustive account of interaction. Without that raw material, there would be nothing to interpret. So let's move on to this fake description. So the daily written accounts of intensive observation invariably fill the pages of many ethnographic notebooks. The visual image of these journals stacked on top of each other would be sufficient justification for Gertz to refer to ethnography as thick description. So what is this thick description? The term thick description describes as the intertwined layers of common meaning that underlie what a particular people say and do. Thick descriptions are powerful reconstructions, not just detailed observations. So thick descriptions is tracing the many strands of a cultural web and tracking evolving meaning. No matter how high the stack of an ethnographer's notes, without interpretation, they would still be thin description. So, metaphors takes language seriously. Metaphors clarifies what is unknown or confusing by equating it with an image that's more familiar or vivid. Metaphors can offer the ethnographer, which is a person that finds the culture of an organization, a starting place for accessing the shared meaning of corporate culture. So, what is this corporate culture again? As I have said earlier, the environment that surrounds each company is called the corporate culture. And this consists of the organization's climate, characters, and image. Culture is learned through the stories of metaphors. Culture is made of artifacts, values, and assumptions as well. This emerged from the interactions of organizational members. This is internal because culture is not whole or divided. The web of organizational culture is a residue of employees' performances. So let's move on to the strengths and limitation of this theory. So one strength of this theory is it's defining what culture is by simplifying it through metaphors, rituals, stories, and rites in order to define what culture really is. So one limitation of this theory is not as popular as it used to be. Nowadays, organizations will hire consultants to come in and completely change the culture and communication in their organization. So it is heavily criticized by corporate consultants. They believe that knowledge should be used to influence culture within an organization. So let's move on to the symbolic interpretation of stories. So the different types of stories in organizations. So we have three. First, we have corporate stories. Next is we have personal stories, and the last one we have the collegial stories. So let's take this one by one. So what is corporate stories? Tales that carry management ideology and reinforce company policy. So and these are stories that may just show what the company is really about, that this is what the company is saying, this is coming straight from the head honcho themselves. These are tales that come from management and their ideology about the company. So that is corporate stories. Next, what is personal stories? Tales told by employees that put them in a favorable light. Stories that company personnel tell about themselves, often defining how they would like to be seen within the organization. So now if you guys have ever seen this show, The Office, which is on NBC, you witness Dwight Schrute. Now, he's one of the funniest characters in there. He's a different character, in my say, and this show they have camera interviews with the employees, and then the interviews on Dwight is mainly pretty much always talking about how much a great employee he was, how he deserves all these others recognitions out because he does this, he does that, and he is always talking about himself, so he's just praising about himself. So that is personal stories. Next, let's move on to the collegial stories. So it is a positive or negative anecdotes about others in the organization. So there's descriptions of how things really work. So you'll also see in the TV show The Office, Jim and Pam, and now also in this interviews, Jim and Pam not so much talk negatively about Dwight, but you'll see them talk about how Dwight doesn't have social awareness. he lacks a basic social awareness. Now, since these tales aren't usually sanctioned by management, collegial counts convey how the organization really works. So by Jim and Pam telling the camera in the interview, this is what we think Dwight does, and you'll see from a different point of view other than Dwight's personal account. So that is the collegial stories.
You could use this theory when communicating to others in a variety of ways. This cultural approach adapts and also finds the qualitative research methodology of ethnography to gain a new understanding of a specific group of people. This will be useful when you're hired for a job. You will be able to be aware of the communication environment within the organization. When
An example of cultural approach to organization is your first day of work, where everything is new to you. You've noticed that everybody had a really close relationship with each other. They have fun working and you almost felt like you were left out. There's a subculture between them and the company itself. It took you a while to finally be incorporated with the social aspect of the job. Another example of this is within friend groups. Have you ever gone to hang out with a friend and ended up with a friend group of theirs that you've never met before? This happened to me plenty of times. You may not know the culture of their friend group and may even feel left out. They may have inside jokes and rituals that you know nothing about. You may feel like an outsider unless they try to include you in the rituals and fill you in on their inside jokes. So, let's move on to rituals. Rituals are texts that articulate multiple aspects of culture life, often marking rites of passage or life transitions. Pakinowski agrees with Gertz that some rituals are texts that articulate multiple aspects of cultural life. These rituals are nearly sacred, and any attempt to change them meets with strong resistance. Although the emphasis on improvisation and novelty reduces the importance of ritual, organizational rites at more traditional companies weave together many threads of corporate culture. So rituals are really important. This dramatize culture's basic values and comes range and scope. They can be very personal. They can be day by day. Come something that everyone does to be something that happens annually, some things that happens biannual, things like that. So basically, rituals are ceremonies or traditions that held at each workplace for a certain amount of time. So we have here, can the manager be an agent of cultural change? The popularity of the cultural metaphor when it was first introduced to the corporate world in the 1980s was undoubtedly due to business leaders' desire to shape interpretation within the organization. So symbols are the tools of management. Executives don't operate forklifts or produce widgets. They cast vision, state goals, process information, send memos, and engage in other symbolic behavior. If they believe that culture is the key to workers' commitment, productivity, and sales, the possibility of changing culture becomes a seductive idea. So, but once corporate culture exists, can it be altered by a manager? Gertz regards shared interpretations as naturally emerging from all members of a group rather than consciously engineered by leaders. So shared meanings are hard to dispel. Symbol watchers within a company quickly discount the words of management if they don't square with performance. But even if culture could be changed, there remains the question of whether it should be. So managers who regard themselves as agents of cultural change create bull in a china shop. fears for ethnographers who have ethical concerns about how their corporate analysis might be used. So you have here, is the cultural approach useful? The cultural approach adopts and refines qualitative research methodology of ethnography to gain a new understanding of a specific group of people. Today, the cultural approach to organizations isn't as important to interpretive scholars as it was in the 1980s. This may be because many researchers trained in organizational communication are hired as consultants by corporate managers looking for change. So Gertz would regard this quest to alter culture as inappropriate and virtually impossible. This purist position exposes him and his admirers within our discipline to criticism from corporate consultants who not only desire to understand organizational communication but also wants to influence it.
So, the cultural approach to organizations theory of Clifford Geertz and Michael Pekinowski has the main idea that every workplace and organization has its own culture. Inside of this culture, you have rituals, which ceremonies or traditions that held at each workplace for a certain amount of time. You also have three different types of stories in this culture. You have corporate stories, personal stories, and collegial stories. So the theory looks into how organizations and business have their own corporate culture within its environment. Culture is a set of meanings that are shared and understood among the employees. So the theory explores what exactly cultural is in a corporate context and how it affects the environment. And once culture is established, can it be changed? So that's it for my topic, guys. I hope you've learned something. Thank you very much for listening and keep safe, everyone.